Ernie Crawford had no idea he was walking into a trap. The contract would steal his life's work. The German investors were counting on his trust, but they forgot one thing. The invisible waitress serving their wine understood every word. Ruth Harrison's hands began to shake. The crystal water pitcher trembled so violently that she had to grip it with both hands to keep it from crashing onto the marble floor of the private dining room. Her legs felt like they might collapse beneath her. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard, she was certain everyone at the table could hear it. Sobald unterschreibt, gehören uns 75% seines Unternehmens. Der alte Narr wird nie erfahren, was ihn getroffen hat. Once he signs, 75% of his company belongs to us. The old fool will never know what hit him. The words hit Ruth like a physical blow. She turned away from the table, pretending to check something on the serving cart, fighting to keep her face blank even as her entire world tilted sideways. They didn't know she understood German. No one did. For 19 years, Ruth had been invisible at the Grandview restaurant, invisible to wealthy executives who discussed million-dollar deals over wine that cost more than her rent, invisible to politicians planning campaigns between bites of filet mignon, invisible to couples whispering about affairs, lawyers laughing about loopholes, powerful people who never considered that the woman refilling their glasses might be listening, might be understanding, might be remembering every single word. She had learned German in secret, studying alone after her shifts ended, free online courses at 2 in the morning, library books read by flashlight. Foreign films watched until the strange sounds became familiar words. 19 years of silent rebellion. Against a world that had decided she was nothing, invisible people see everything. That was Ruth's truth, and everything she saw, she remembered, but she never spoke. That was the rule. Until tonight. Tonight, the rule was about to break. Günther Schmidt sat at the head of the table like a king holding court. Silver hair perfectly styled, charcoal suit that cost more than Ruth earned in a year, cold blue eyes that assessed everything and everyone like merchandise to be appraised and discarded. He was speaking in English now, his German accent thick, but his words smooth as honey poured over broken glass. Mr. Crawford, I cannot express how honored we are to partner with Crawford Manufacturing. Your reputation for excellence is known even in Germany. The man sitting across from Schmidt smiled with such genuine warmth that Ruth felt her heart crack. Ernie Crawford was not like the other clients at the Grandview. His suit was off the rack, too big in the shoulders. His hands were rough and calloused, the hands of a man who had spent 35 years building something real. His weathered face carried lines from smiling, not scheming. He was a good man. Ruth could see it in his eyes. The same honest, trusting eyes her late husband had possessed. Eyes that couldn't see wolves until their teeth were already at his throat. Well, Mr. Schmidt, I started with nothing but a pickup truck and a dream, Ernie said, his voice carrying the slight tremor of a man still amazed by his own success. My wife Margaret, God rest her soul, she was the one who believed we could make it. Worked beside me every single day until the cancer took her. He paused, swallowing hard. She would have been so proud to see this day. Schmidt nodded with practiced sympathy. Your wife sounds like a remarkable woman. We intend to honor her memory by making this partnership legendary. Ruth watched Schmidt's associates exchange glances. One of them smirked. Then Schmidt switched back to German, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Seine tote Frau zu erwähnen macht es fast zu einfach, der sentimentale alte Dummkopf. Mentioning his dead wife makes this almost too easy. The sentimental old fool. The other Germans laughed quietly. One of them raised his wine glass in a mock toast. Ruth's vision blurred with rage. Her hands clenched so tightly around the serving napkin that her knuckles turned white. She wanted to scream. She wanted to flip the table over and expose these monsters for what they were. She wanted to grab Ernie Crawford by the shoulders and shake him until he understood that everything he had built, everything his wife had believed in, was about to be stolen by men who laughed at her memory. But she was invisible. She was nobody. She was just a waitress. Who would believe her? Die Vertragsklauseln auf Seite 47 und 52 sind Kunstwerke, Schmidt continued, savoring his wine. Die englische Übersetzung, die wir ihm gegeben haben, erwähnt keine davon. Wenn merkt, was passiert ist, werden wir bereits alles kontrollieren. The contract clauses on pages 47 and 52 are works of art. The English translation we gave him mentions none of them. By the time he realizes what happened, we'll already control everything. Aunt der Sohn? One of the associates asked. glancing toward the young man seated beside Ernie. Ruth followed his gaze. Matthew Crawford was in his early 30s, tall and dark-haired, with the same honest eyes as his father. But where Ernie radiated trust, Matthew radiated worry. He kept glancing at the contract folder, his brow furrowed, his fingers tapping nervously against the table. He senses something wrong, Ruth realized. He just doesn't know what. Schmidt smiled like a snake watching a mouse approach its den. Der Sohn ist das Beste daran. War derjenige, der seinen Vater zu diesem Geschäft überredet hat. Denkt, rettet das Familienunternehmen. Wenn die Wahrheit erfährt, wird es ihn zerstören. Wird seinen Vater nie wieder in die Augen sehen können. The son is the best part. He was the one who convinced his father to make this deal. He thinks he's saving the family business. When he learns the truth, it will destroy him. He'll never be able to look his father in the eye again. Ruth felt sick. The dinner continued. Plates were served and cleared. Wine flowed. And all the while Schmidt and his associates spoke freely in German, laughing about how trusting Americans were, how Ernie Crawford would lose everything and thank them for the privilege. Ruth moved through the room like a ghost, her mind racing through impossible options. She had less than a week before the signing, less than a week to warn Ernie without exposing herself, without being dismissed as insane. But what did she have, really? A small apartment, a job serving people who looked through her, a life built on being invisible. Maybe it was time to be seen. Sie dort, Kellnerin. The German words cut through Ruth's thoughts like a blade. You there, waitress. She turned slowly, her heart hammering, to find Günther Schmidt staring directly at her. His cold blue eyes were narrowed, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Yes, sir? Ruth kept her voice steady, her expression blank. 19 years of practice. 19 years of being invisible. Schmidt tilted his head slightly, like a predator assessing prey. You've been standing very still, he said in English, his accent making the words feel like a threat. Is something wrong? Ruth felt the weight of the moment crushing down on her. The other Germans were watching now. So was Ernie. So was Matthew. No, sir. She forced a small, servile smile. Just making sure everything is perfect for your dinner. Schmidt held her gaze for a long, terrible moment. Then he smiled, and that smile was worse than his stare. Sehr gut, he said softly. Very good. He turned back to the table, dismissing her existence with a wave of his hand. Ruth retreated to the corner of the room, her legs shaking. Her manager, Carlos, appeared in the doorway, his expression concerned. Ruth, you okay? He whispered. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, she lied. Just tired. But Carlos kept watching her. Her invisibility was cracking. The dessert was served. Then Ernie Crawford stood and extended his hand to Günther Schmidt. Mr. Schmidt, I want to thank you for believing in Crawford Manufacturing. This partnership means the world to me and my family. Matthew stood as well, but Ruth could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He felt something was wrong. The signing ceremony next week will be historic, Schmidt said. A moment your family will remember forever. Forever. The word echoed like a death sentence. The Germans gathered their coats and prepared to leave. Ernie lingered at the table, looking at a photo on his phone, his eyes glistening. That's her, he said softly to no one in particular. That's my Margaret. 32 years of marriage. She always said I was too trusting, said I needed to be more careful. He laughed quietly. But I always told her that if you can't trust people, what's the point of living? Ruth stopped breathing. She couldn't do nothing. She couldn't watch this good man walk into destruction. She couldn't let Margaret Crawford's memory be used as a weapon against her own husband. Not today, not ever. Matthew was standing alone near the window, staring at the contract folder in his hands. The Germans were in the corridor laughing about something. Ernie was still lost in his memories. This was her chance, her only chance. Ruth grabbed a fresh napkin from the serving station. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold the pen. She wrote quickly, her handwriting jagged with fear. Pages 47 and 52. The German version is different. They are stealing everything. Do not let him sign. She folded the napkin once, twice, 3 times until it was small enough to hide in her palm. Then she walked toward Matthew, carrying a tray of after-dinner mints. Compliments of the house, sir, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As Matthew reached for a mint, Ruth pressed the folded napkin into his hand. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Read it alone, she breathed, before it's too late. Then she turned and walked away, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She made it 3 steps before she heard the voice. Halt! Sie dort! Stop! You there! Ruth froze. The German words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. She turned slowly to find Günther Schmidt standing in the doorway, his cold eyes locked onto her face. Behind him, his associates had stopped laughing. The entire room had gone silent. Matthew quickly slipped his hand into his pocket, hiding the napkin. Schmidt walked toward Ruth with slow, deliberate steps. Each footfall echoed on the marble floor like a countdown to execution. "I was watching you," he said quietly, his English now sharp and dangerous. "All evening, you were watching us, listening, very carefully." Ruth's throat closed with terror. "I was just doing my job, sir. Your job." Schmidt stopped less than a foot away from her. She could smell his cologne, expensive and suffocating. "Tell me something, waitress. Do you speak any German?" The question was a trap. Ruth could feel it closing around her like jaws. "No, sir." The lie came out steady, practiced, perfect. "Just English and a little Spanish." Schmidt studied her face for an eternity. His eyes searched hers, looking for the truth, looking for the crack in her mask. Finally, he smiled, that terrible reptilian smile. "Of course not," he said softly. "Why would you?" He turned and walked away without another word. Ruth didn't move. She didn't breathe. She stood frozen in that spot until Schmidt and his associates disappeared through the front entrance of the restaurant. Only then did she allow herself to exhale. Only then did she realize that Carlos had been watching the entire exchange from across the room, his face pale with confusion. Only then did she see Matthew Crawford slip out through a side door, the napkin clutched tightly in his fist. Ruth walked to the service station on legs that felt borrowed. She leaned against the counter, shaking, and closed her eyes. She had done it. She had broken 19 years of silence. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. What Ruth didn't know was that Günther Schmidt had stopped just outside the restaurant. He was speaking into his phone, his voice low and deadly. "Die Kellnerin weiß etwas. Ich konnte es in ihren Augen sehen. The waitress knows something. I could see it in her eyes." A pause. "Finde heraus, wer sie ist. Wo sie lebt. Ob sie Familie hat. Find out who she is. Where she lives. If she has family. Und stell sicher, dass sie Freitag nicht mehr im Weg ist. And make sure she's not in the way by Friday." He ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket. Then Günther Schmidt smiled at the night sky and whispered, "Unsichtbar. Invisible. Not anymore." Matthew Crawford sat in his car for 47 minutes before he found the courage to unfold the napkin. The parking garage beneath his apartment was silent. His hands trembled as he smoothed the crumpled paper against the steering wheel, reading the jagged handwriting 3 times. Pages 47 and 52. The German version is different. They are stealing everything. Do not let him sign. His first instinct was to laugh. A waitress had slipped him a conspiracy theory on a napkin. It was absurd. Günther Schmidt was one of the most respected businessmen in European manufacturing. His company had been vetted by lawyers and accountants. Everything was legitimate. Everything had to be legitimate. Because if it wasn't, then Matthew had just convinced his own father to walk into a trap. He closed his eyes and saw his father's face at dinner. The pride. The gratitude. Matthew had worked for 6 months to make this partnership happen. 6 months of convincing his father that expansion was the only way to survive. If the waitress was telling the truth, Matthew had just destroyed everything his father spent 35 years building. He pulled out the contract folder and found page 47 with shaking hands. At first he saw nothing unusual. Standard clauses about profit distribution, legal language that blurred together. He was about to dismiss the whole thing when his eye caught something at the bottom of the page. A reference to Appendix D. Matthew flipped to the appendix. His blood turned to ice. The clause was buried in sub-paragraph 7. 3.2. It took 3 readings to understand what it said. Automatic equity transfer, triggered by performance metrics. Crawford Manufacturing could never meet. Graduated over 18 months until controlling interest shifted entirely to Schmidt's company. His father would lose 75% of his business without ever realizing how. Matthew turned to page 52. It was worse. Personal liability provisions. If the company failed certain benchmarks, Ernie Crawford would be personally responsible. Not the company. Ernie himself, his house, his savings, his retirement, everything. Matthew sat in the darkness, staring at the proof that his father's trusted partners were criminals. The napkin sat beside him, that desperate scrawl looking less like paranoid nonsense and more like a lifeline thrown by a stranger with no reason to help. Who was she? Why would she risk everything? He dialed his father's number. "Son, what a night, huh? I still can't believe this is really happening." The joy in his father's voice was unbearable. "Dad, I need to talk to you. Tonight. It's urgent. Can you come to my apartment? Don't tell anyone where you're going." Matthew gripped the phone. "And Dad, don't sign anything until we talk." Silence stretched. "Matthew, you're scaring me. I'll explain when you get here. Please trust me. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Matthew stared at the napkin. The waitress had saved his father's life, and judging by the way Schmidt had looked at her, she might be in terrible danger because of it. Ruth couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The way Schmidt had walked toward her, the ice in his eyes, the smile that had nothing to do with warmth. He suspected something. 19 years of being invisible, and in one moment she had made herself visible to a dangerous man. The clock read 2:47 a.m. Ruth walked to the window. The street was empty except for a single car, a black sedan with tinted windows that hadn't been there when she came home. Her heart began to pound. She stepped back from the window. It could be nothing. A neighbor's visitor. 100 innocent explanations. But her instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through contacts. Her son David lived 3 hours away. Her sister was on a cruise. Her co-workers were acquaintances, not friends. After 19 years of invisibility, Ruth had no one. No one except a man she had never actually spoken to. She looked at the black sedan again. Someone was watching her apartment. She made a decision. Moving quickly, she gathered a small bag. Clothes, phone charger, emergency cash, her passport. She wrote a note and left it on the kitchen table. "If something happens to me, look into Gunther Schmidt, the Grandview restaurant, the Crawford contract. They are criminals." She slipped out the back entrance, through the basement, into the alley. The black sedan remained parked out front, its occupants unaware their target had disappeared. Ruth walked for blocks before finding a 24-hour diner. She ordered coffee she didn't want and sat watching the street. What had she done? She was a 54-year-old waitress with no connections, no resources, no power. She had made an enemy of a man who had looked at her like an insect to be crushed. But she had done the right thing. For the first time in 19 years, she had spoken up. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this Ruth Harrison?" A male voice, young and urgent. "Who is this?" "Matthew Crawford. You gave me a napkin tonight. I need to see you. It's about my father." Ruth's heart nearly stopped. He believed her. "How did you get this number?" "I called the restaurant. Told them it was an emergency." A pause. "We read the contract, the real contract. You were right about everything. They were going to steal his entire company." Relief and fear battled inside her. "There was a car outside my building tonight," she said quietly. "Black sedan. I think Schmidt is already looking for me." "Where are you now?" "A diner. I don't know where else to go. Give me the address. I'm coming to get you. You saved my father's life. The least I can do is make sure you survive the week." Ruth gave him the address. Then she sat clutching her coffee cup, waiting for a stranger to rescue her from a nightmare she had willingly entered. 20 minutes later, a blue pickup truck arrived. Matthew Crawford stepped out, followed by an older man Ruth recognized immediately. Ernie Crawford looked like he had aged 10 years. His eyes were red-rimmed, his shoulders slumped. This was a man who had just learned everything he believed was a lie. They slid into the booth across from her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ernie took Ruth's hands in his. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick. "You saved everything, my company, my family, my life." Ruth felt tears prick her eyes. "I couldn't stay silent, not this time." "The contract," Matthew said, pulling the folder from his jacket. "We need to understand exactly what they were planning. The signing is Friday." "They mentioned it at dinner," Ruth said. "Schmidt said he wanted it to be a moment you'd remember forever." The cruel irony hung in the air. Ernie's jaw tightened. "That man smiled at my face and planned to destroy everything I've built. He used my wife's memory to manipulate me." His hands clenched. "I want him to pay." "We need to be careful," Matthew said. "Schmidt has resources we can't imagine. If we go to the police with just suspicions, his lawyers will destroy us." "Then what do we do?" Ruth asked. Matthew looked at her intently. You said the German version is different. How do you know? This was the moment she dreaded. I speak German, she said quietly. I've been learning for 18 years. I hear things at the restaurant. Both men stared in stunned silence. You speak German, Ernie repeated. And you've been listening for 18 years. I hear things. Secrets, plans, politicians discussing bribes, executives planning layoffs. Ruth looked down. A lot of things I wish I hadn't heard. And you never said anything, Matthew said with wonder. Who would believe a waitress? Ruth met his eyes. But your father was different. He was kind. He treated me like a person. I couldn't let it happen. Ernie's eyes glistened. Tell me everything you heard. Every word. Every detail. Ruth nodded. I can tell you exactly which clauses they mentioned, their timeline, how they planned to execute the takeover. She paused. And something I didn't put in the napkin. This isn't the first time they've done this. Matthew leaned forward. Schmidt mentioned another company, an American manufacturer they acquired 3 years ago using the same method. He called it a prototype. Father and son exchanged looks of horror. If we can find that company, Ruth continued, prove they used the same tactics, we might build a case beyond just one fraudulent contract. We could expose their entire operation, Matthew breathed. We could destroy them, Ernie said. Matthew pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. I'm looking up German acquisitions of American manufacturers in the past 5 years. If we can identify which company Schmidt was talking about, we might find other victims willing to testify. There's more, Ruth said, the memories flooding back. During dinner, one of Schmidt's associates mentioned a lawyer in Munich who specialized in creating what they called untraceable contracts. They laughed about how no American court had ever successfully prosecuted one of their deals. Ernie's face hardened. They've been doing this for years, getting away with it for years. Not anymore, Matthew said grimly. Not if we can help it. Ruth looked at these men who were now her only allies. There's something else. Schmidt suspected me at the restaurant, the way he looked at me before he left. And now people are watching my apartment. Matthew's jaw tightened. He moved fast. That means he's scared. Or it means he's thorough, Ernie said quietly. A man like Schmidt doesn't leave loose ends. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. You're coming home with us, Ernie said, turning to Ruth. No arguments. You're not safe alone. Mr. Crawford, I can't put your family in more danger. You saved my family. Now my family protects you. Ernie's voice was firm, but his eyes were gentle. You've been alone for 19 years, Ruth. Invisible. Watching out for yourself because nobody else would. But not anymore. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Ruth felt something crack inside her chest. When was the last time someone had offered to protect her? When was the last time she hadn't been alone? My son, David, should know what's happening, she said quietly. If something happens to me, he deserves to understand why. We'll call him together, Matthew said. We'll explain everything. And when this is over, when Schmidt is exposed and your name is cleared, David will know that his mother is a hero. Ruth shook her head. I'm not a hero. I'm just a woman who got tired of being invisible. Sometimes that's exactly what a hero is, Ernie said softly. Ruth thought about the black sedan, about Schmidt's cold eyes, about the whispered threat. Make sure she's not in the way by Friday. Friday was 4 days away. Okay, Ruth said finally. Together. They paid for the coffee and walked out into the cold night air. Matthew's truck was parked under a streetlight, looking ordinary and safe. But as Ruth climbed into the back seat, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. We need a plan, Matthew said as he started the engine. We can't just wait for Schmidt to make his move. Tomorrow morning I'll call my lawyer, Ernie said. The real one, not Gunther's people. We'll get the contracts analyzed by someone we trust completely. And I'll start researching Schmidt's previous acquisitions, Matthew added. If there's a pattern, we'll find it. Ruth stared out the window as the city lights blurred past. 4 days. They had 4 days to expose an international criminal enterprise, protect themselves from people who apparently had no problem making witnesses disappear, and somehow prevent a man who had trusted the wrong people from losing everything he'd built. 4 days to prove that sometimes the invisible see more than anyone realizes. What none of them knew was that the black sedan had already reported Ruth's disappearance. Gunther Schmidt, woken by an urgent call, was sitting in his hotel suite staring at a photograph of the waitress who had ruined his plan. Find her, he said into the phone. Find her tonight. and find out what she told them. He ended the call and poured himself a whiskey, swirling it as he considered his options. Then he made another call. "Prepare the contingency," he said calmly. "If the Crawford deal falls through, we proceed with option B. The waitress, the son, the father, all of them." He listened, then smiled coldly. "No, not yet. First, I want to know exactly how much she knows, and exactly how much she's told them." He paused. "Then we neutralize the situation permanently." He looked out at the city lights, his reflection ghostly in the window. The waitress thought she had saved the Crawfords. She had no idea that she had just made them all targets, and Günther Schmidt never missed. The Crawford house was nothing like Ruth had expected. She had imagined marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Instead, she found warm hardwood, family photographs covering every wall, and a kitchen that smelled like coffee and home. "Margaret designed everything," Ernie said quietly. "She said a house should feel like a hug, not a museum." Ruth touched a photograph on the mantel, a younger Ernie with his arm around a woman with kind eyes. Matthew as a teenager, grinning between them. "She was beautiful," Ruth said. "She was everything." Ernie's voice cracked. "And Schmidt used her memory to manipulate me. That's what I can't forgive." Matthew emerged from the study, his face lit by his laptop screen as dawn broke through the windows. "I found something. The company Schmidt mentioned. The prototype." Ruth and Ernie followed him. The laptop displayed a news article from 3 years ago. "Harrison Metalworks founder dies by suicide after mysterious bankruptcy." "Harrison Metalworks," Matthew said. "Family-owned precision manufacturing in Ohio. Sound familiar?" Ruth read with growing dread. "Walter Harrison, 62, was found dead 3 days after his company filed for unexpected bankruptcy. His family claims he was victim of fraudulent business partners who stripped the company through hidden contract clauses. No charges were filed. The German firm involved, Steinberg Industries, denied wrongdoing and settled out of court." "Steinberg Industries," Ernie said. "That's not Schmidt's company. Look at this." Matthew clicked to another tab. A corporate filing showed Steinberg's board of directors. Third name, Günther Schmidt, executive consultant. "He was involved," Ruth breathed. "He helped destroy that family, then created his own company using the same methods. And Walter Harrison killed himself because of it," Matthew said grimly. The room fell silent. Ruth thought about how close Ernie had come to the same fate. If she hadn't overheard that conversation, if she hadn't found the courage to pass that napkin, if Matthew hadn't believed her, Ernie would have signed on Friday. He would have lost everything. And based on what they now knew, he might have lost far more than his company. "There's more," Matthew continued, scrolling through search results. "Walter Harrison had a daughter, Linda Harrison Cole. She's a lawyer now, lives in Chicago, and look at this." He clicked on a legal blog post. "She's been trying to build a case against Steinberg for years. Multiple interviews calling for investigation into their practices. A lawyer whose father was destroyed by the same people," Ernie said slowly. "She might have evidence," Ruth said, her mind racing. "Documents, testimony, something that proves this is a pattern. If we can connect Schmidt to both cases, we expose an entire criminal enterprise," Matthew finished. Ernie reached for his phone. "I'm calling Thomas Chen, my attorney for 20 years. I trust him with my life." "Be careful what you say," Ruth warned. "If Schmidt has people watching my apartment, he might have other resources." Ernie nodded and stepped into the hallway. Ernie reached for his phone. "I'm calling my lawyer, Thomas Chen. He's been my attorney for 20 years. I trust him with my life." "Be careful what you say on the phone," Ruth warned. "If Schmidt has people watching my apartment, he might have other resources we don't know about." Ernie nodded grimly and stepped into the hallway to make the call. Ruth and Matthew sat in silence, the weight of everything pressing down. "How did you learn German?" Matthew asked suddenly. 18 years of secret studying. That's dedication. Why German specifically?" No one had ever asked her that before. "My husband," she finally said. "Before he died, we planned to visit Germany together. His grandmother was from Munich. He wanted to see where she grew up." She paused. "He died before we could go. Car accident 11 years ago." "I'm sorry," Matthew said softly. "After he was gone, I started learning German. To honor his memory, I told myself. But honestly, I needed something that was mine. Something that made me feel like more than just a waitress." "You are more," Matthew said firmly. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it, heart pounding. Something felt wrong. She answered. Ruth Harrison. The voice was smooth, accented, terrifyingly familiar. I believe we met yesterday evening, at the Grandview. Ruth's blood turned to ice. Günther Schmidt. Matthew saw her face change and moved closer. She pressed speaker. I don't know what you're talking about, Ruth managed. Schmidt laughed softly. Please, let's not insult each other's intelligence. You understand German, you warned the Crawfords, I'm impressed. In 30 years, no one has disrupted my plans like a 54-year-old waitress. What do you want? Simple. Convince the Crawfords to sign on Friday, tell them it was a misunderstanding, tell them you were wrong. And if I don't? Things become very unpleasant. Schmidt's tone remained conversational. I know where your son David lives. I know the route he takes to drop his daughter at school every morning. Ruth felt the world tilt. Her granddaughter. You wouldn't, she whispered. I'm a businessman, Mrs. Harrison. I don't make threats I won't follow through on. You have until tomorrow evening. The line went dead. Ruth stared at the phone, trembling. Matthew was pacing with barely contained fury. He threatened a child, Matthew said, shaking with anger. My granddaughter. Emma, she's 6 years old. Ernie appeared in the doorway, pale. He had heard everything. We need to call the police, he said. And tell them what? Matthew shot back. A respected businessman made a vague threat? We have no recording. Schmidt is too smart for that. Then what do we do? Ruth asked, tears streaming. I can't let him hurt Emma. Ernie took Ruth's hands. We're not going to let him hurt anyone, but we can't back down. If we do, Schmidt wins. He destroys my company and does this to another family, and another. We find Linda Harrison Cole, Matthew said. Find her evidence. Build a case so airtight Schmidt can't threaten his way out. And my family. We warn David. Make sure he and Emma are safe until this is over. Matthew's jaw was set. Schmidt thinks he can intimidate us. We're going to prove him wrong. Ruth wiped her eyes and thought about everything she had to lose, and everything she would lose if she didn't fight. Okay, let's find Linda Harrison Cole. 3 hours later, Ruth was on a plane to Chicago. Matthew had wanted to come, but Ernie needed him. Thomas Chen, their lawyer, was reviewing the contract, and someone had to coordinate if Schmidt moved again. Ruth had never flown first class. She watched the clouds drift past, wondering how her life had changed so completely in 48 hours. She had called David before leaving, the hardest conversation of her life. Mum, go to the police, David had begged. They can't help without evidence. Take Emma to Sarah's cabin. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Let me do something. Keep Emma safe. That's everything. Ruth's voice cracked. I'm sorry I brought this into your life. Mom. David softened. You did the right thing. You saved a man's life. I'm proud of you. Just scared. I'm scared too, but I'm also angry. And right now, anger is stronger than fear. The plane landed at O'Hare at noon. Ruth took a taxi to Linda Harrison Cole's law firm downtown. The receptionist looked up. Can I help you? I need to speak with Linda Harrison Cole. Tell her it's about Steinberg Industries. And Günther Schmidt. The receptionist's eyes widened. She made a call, then said, Ms. Harrison Cole will see you immediately. Ruth was led to a corner office. The woman who rose to greet her was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a determined jaw, someone who had fought battles at great cost. You mentioned Günther Schmidt, Linda said. How do you know that name? Because he's trying to destroy another family, the same way he destroyed yours. Linda went pale. She sank into her chair. Tell me everything. Ruth told her about the Grandview, about learning German, about the conversation she overheard, the contract with hidden clauses, Schmidt's phone call that morning, the threat against Emma. When she finished, Linda sat silent for a long moment, tears glistening. My father was a good man, she finally said. The best I ever knew. He built Harrison Metalworks from nothing, just like your Mr. Crawford. Started in his garage with a single machine, worked 16-hour days for 30 years. Never cheated anyone, never cut corners. He believed that honest work would always be rewarded. Linda's voice cracked. And then Schmidt destroyed him. In 6 months, everything my father built was gone. His company, his reputation, his savings, everything. The article said suicide. Ruth said gently. Linda's jaw tightened. He didn't kill himself because he lost his company. My father was strong. He could have started over. She wiped her eyes. He killed himself because he couldn't live with the guilt. He blamed himself for losing everything, for failing our family. He didn't understand that he had been robbed. He thought he was a failure. Schmidt didn't just steal his business, Ruth said quietly. He stole his belief in himself, his dignity, his will to live. Linda stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. For 3 years I've been trying to build a case, gathering evidence, talking to other victims. But Schmidt is smart. He covers his tracks, uses shell companies, foreign accounts, intermediaries. Every time I think I have enough, the trail goes cold. But now you have us, Ruth said, a victim who didn't sign. Proof of what Schmidt was planning before he could execute it. Linda turned, her eyes lighting with fierce hope. You're still in the middle of it. The contract hasn't been signed. The fraud hasn't been completed. Exactly. We have the fraudulent documents. We have witnesses. We have his threats recorded on my phone. You recorded him? Ruth's heart sank. No, I didn't think. It doesn't matter. Linda was already moving, pulling a thick folder from her desk drawer. What matters is that we can prove intent. We can show the pattern. Steinberg Industries 3 years ago, Crawford Manufacturing now. Same tactics, same clauses, same man behind it all. She slid the folder across the desk. This is everything I've gathered. Documents, testimony, financial records, bank transfers that trace back to Schmidt through 3 different shell companies, emails from former Steinberg employees who were willing to talk, even an interview with the widow of another victim in Germany. Ruth took the folder with trembling hands. It was heavy. 3 years of grief and determination and sleepless nights made physical. Why are you giving this to me? Ruth asked. Because I've been waiting for someone like you. Linda leaned forward. Someone brave enough to speak up. Someone still in the middle of the fight. Someone who can prove that what happened to my father wasn't an isolated incident. What do we do with all this? You take it to the FBI, Financial Crimes Division. With your testimony, the Crawford contract, and my evidence, they'll have enough to open a federal investigation. Linda's voice hardened. Schmidt has been operating across state lines, international boundaries. That makes it federal. And federal prosecutors don't make deals with men who threaten children. Ruth looked at the folder, then back at Linda. Your father would be proud of you. Linda's composure cracked. For a moment, she was just a daughter who missed her father. I hope so, she whispered. I really hope so. Ruth took the folder with trembling hands. Inside were the weapons she needed to fight back. Evidence, truth, justice. But as she left Linda's office and stepped into the Chicago afternoon, clutching the folder that could destroy Gunther Schmidt, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it and felt her heart stop. It was a photograph. Emma at school playing on the playground, her blonde pigtails bouncing as she ran, completely unaware she was being watched. Below the image, 3 words, tick-tock, Ruth. Schmidt wasn't waiting until tomorrow. The clock was already running, and Ruth was 300 miles from the people she loved. Ruth's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she stared at the photograph of Emma on her phone. Her granddaughter, 6 years old, blonde pigtails bouncing as she played on the school playground, completely unaware that a monster was watching her. The image had been taken from close range, too close. Someone had been standing right there, feet away from Emma, and no one had noticed. Tick-tock, Ruth. She called David immediately. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Mom? David? Where are you? Where's Emma? We're almost at Sarah's cabin. About an hour away. Why? What happened? Ruth closed her eyes, relief washing over her so intensely that she nearly collapsed against the wall of the office building. Someone took a photo of Emma at school today. Schmidt's people, they sent it to me. Silence on the other end. Then David's voice, tight with controlled fear. We left right after I picked her up. We didn't go home. We didn't stop anywhere. If they were watching the school, they don't know where we're going. Stay at the cabin. Don't leave for any reason. Don't answer the door for anyone you don't know. Mom, this is insane. We need to go to the police. We're going to the FBI tonight. I have evidence now, David, real evidence, enough to put Schmidt away for years. Ruth paused, gathering her strength. I just need you to keep Emma safe for a little longer. Can you do that? I'll protect her with my life. David's voice cracked. Just be careful, Mom, please. I love you, sweetheart. I love you too. Ruth ended the call and immediately dialed Matthew. He answered on the first ring. Ruth, what's wrong? You sound... Schmidt sent me a photo of Emma at her school. He's escalating. She heard Matthew relay the information to someone in the background. Then Ernie's voice came on the line. Ruth, listen to me. Thomas Chen found something in the contract. Something big. You need to get back here as fast as possible. What did he find? I don't want to say over the phone, but it changes everything. How soon can you get to the airport? Ruth was already walking, her legs moving faster than her mind could process. I'm leaving now. I'll be on the next flight. We'll pick you up. And Ruth? Ernie's voice was grave. Be careful. If Schmidt knows about Emma, he might know where you are too. Ruth looked around the busy Chicago street. Business people walking past, taxis honking, the ordinary chaos of a city afternoon. Any one of these people could be watching her. Any one of them could be working for Schmidt. She had never felt so exposed in her life. The flight back felt like an eternity. Ruth sat clutching Linda's folder of evidence, her eyes scanning every passenger who walked down the aisle. The businessman with the laptop who kept glancing in her direction. The young mother with the crying baby who seemed too nervous. The elderly man reading a newspaper who hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Were any of them Schmidt's people? Was she being paranoid or was she being smart? 19 years of invisibility had taught her to read people. The way they held their shoulders when they lied. The way their eyes flickered when they were hiding something. The way their smiles never quite reached their eyes when they were pretending. But it had also taught her that the most dangerous threats often came from the faces you least expected. The kind customer who turned cruel after a few drinks. The friendly colleague who spread rumors behind your back. The trusted partner who planned to steal everything you had. Like Günther Schmidt. She opened the folder and began reviewing Linda's evidence again, forcing herself to focus on the documents rather than the fear coiling in her stomach. Bank transfers traced through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, and Singapore. Each transaction designed to obscure the money trail, to make it impossible for investigators to follow. But Linda had followed it anyway. 3 years of sleepless nights, obsessive research and refusing to give up. There were emails from a former Steinberg employee describing how contracts were deliberately mistranslated. The employee had been fired shortly after raising concerns and had signed a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for a settlement. But he had kept copies of everything, waiting for someone to come asking the right questions. Testimony from the widow of a German businessman who had lost everything to a similar scheme. Her husband had trusted Schmidt completely, right up until the moment he realized he had been betrayed. He had died of a heart attack 3 months later. The widow believed the stress had killed him, and at the bottom of the stack a photograph that made Ruth's blood run cold. It was a corporate event, some kind of gala with men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns. In the center of the frame, Günther Schmidt stood with his arm around another man, both of them smiling at the camera. The other man was wearing a name tag, Senator Richard Walsh. Ruth recognized that name. Walsh was one of the most powerful politicians in the state. His face was on billboards, his voice was on the radio, his influence reached into every corner of government, and he was friends with Günther Schmidt. This was bigger than she had imagined. Much bigger. Matthew was waiting at the airport when Ruth landed. His face was pale, his jaw tight with tension. "Something happened while you were in the air," he said, as they rushed to the car. Carlos called. Ruth stopped walking. "Carlos? My manager at the Grandview? He's been trying to reach you all day. He said Schmidt's people came to the restaurant asking questions about you, where you live, who your family is, how long you've worked there." Matthew opened the car door for her. But that's not the important part. Carlos told them nothing, and then he did something incredibly brave. What did he do? Matthew started the engine and pulled out of the parking structure before answering. He followed them. When they left the restaurant, Carlos got in his car and followed them to their hotel. He watched them meet with someone in the lobby. Matthew glanced at her. Ruth, it was Schmidt himself. Carlos took photos. "He's willing to testify that Schmidt is personally directing the surveillance operation against you." Ruth felt tears prick her eyes. Carlos. The manager who had noticed something was wrong with her that night at the restaurant. The man she had worked alongside for nearly 2 decades, sharing quiet conversations during slow shifts, covering for each other when things got hectic. She had dismissed him as just another boss, just another person who saw her as nothing more than an employee. But he had seen her. All along, he had seen her, and he had risked everything to help her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would he do that?" "Because you've worked for him for 19 years, Matthew said simply. "Because you never missed a day, never complained, never caused any problems. Because when everyone else treated you like furniture, you treated everyone with respect. The busboys, the dishwashers, the new servers who didn't know what they were doing. You helped them all." Ruth remembered the young waitress who had spilled soup on a customer last year. Ruth had stepped in, calmed the situation, and stayed late to help the girl clean up. She remembered the dishwasher who couldn't read English well. Ruth had helped him understand the schedule, had translated when managers gave confusing instructions. Small kindnesses, invisible kindnesses, the kind that nobody noticed, except apparently someone had. Carlos said you're the best person he's ever known, Matthew continued, and he wasn't going to let anyone hurt you without a fight. Ruth wiped her eyes. Invisible for 19 years, and now when she needed it most, she was discovering that she had never been as invisible as she thought. Her kindness had planted seeds she never knew existed, and now those seeds were growing into something that might just save her life. They arrived at the Crawford house to find it transformed into a war room. Thomas Chen, Ernie's lawyer, had spread documents across the dining room table. A laptop displayed financial records. A whiteboard showed a timeline of Schmidt's activities over the past 5 years, and standing in the corner, looking uncomfortable but determined, was Carlos. He stepped forward when Ruth entered, his eyes filled with emotion. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm so sorry I didn't do more sooner. When I saw how scared you looked that night, I knew something was wrong. I should have asked, I should have helped." Ruth took his hands in hers. "You're helping now. That's what matters." Thomas Chen cleared his throat. "We need to move quickly. What I found in the contract is explosive, but Schmidt is clearly aware that his plan is falling apart. The surveillance, the threats, the photo of your granddaughter, he's getting desperate. Desperate men are dangerous." "What did you find?" Ruth asked. Thomas pointed to a section of the contract highlighted in yellow. "Page 52, the personal liability clause. It's not just designed to transfer risk to Ernie, it's designed to create criminal exposure." "What do you mean?" "The clause references compliance with certain German regulations that don't actually exist in the form described. If Ernie had signed this contract and the company later failed, Schmidt could have used this clause to accuse Ernie of fraud. Not just civil fraud and criminal fraud. He could have had Ernie arrested." The room fell silent. "So he wasn't just going to steal my company," Ernie said slowly. "He was going to send me to prison for it. And with your reputation destroyed and your assets seized, no one would have believed your claims of innocence." Thomas shook his head. "It's diabolical, the perfect crime. Steal everything from a man, then frame him for the theft." Ruth thought about Walter Harrison, about the guilt that had consumed him, the shame that had driven him to take his own life. Schmidt hadn't just stolen his company, he had stolen his sense of self, his belief in his own innocence. Now she understood why. Schmidt didn't just want money. He wanted to destroy his victims so completely that they could never fight back. "We need to go to the FBI tonight," Ruth said. "We have Linda's evidence, Thomas's analysis, Carlos's testimony, and Schmidt's own threats against my family. It's enough." "There's one more thing," Matthew said, pulling out his phone. "I've been in contact with Linda Harrison Cole. She's flying in tomorrow morning. She wants to be here when we take Schmidt down. Why? Because she's waited 3 years for this moment. And because she has one more piece of evidence she didn't give you." Matthew looked at Ruth with an intensity that made her heart race. "An audio recording from the night her father died. A voicemail he left her, describing exactly what Schmidt did to him. In his own words." Ruth felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. A dead man's final words. A daughter's 3-year quest for justice. A family nearly destroyed. And at the center of it all, a monster in an expensive suit who thought he was untouchable. "Tomorrow," Ernie said firmly. "Tomorrow, we end this." But before anyone could respond, Ruth's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another message. She opened it with trembling hands. "You think you're clever, Ruth, but I'm always 3 steps ahead. Check the news." Ruth looked at the others, then opened her browser and searched for local news. The headline made her heart stop. FBI agent found dead in apparent suicide. Agent Michael Torres was lead investigator in Financial Crimes Division. Below the headline, a photograph of a middle-aged man in a suit. The same man Linda had told her to contact. The same man who was supposed to bring Schmidt to justice. He was dead. And Ruth knew in her bones that it wasn't suicide. Schmidt had killed their only hope, and now he was coming for them. Her phone buzzed one more time. "Tomorrow, Ruth, the Grand View, 8 p.m. Come alone, or little Emma learns what happens to people who cross me." The trap was set, and Ruth had no choice but to walk into it. Ruth Harrison walked into the Grandview restaurant at exactly 8 p.m. She had spent 19 years entering through the service door, invisible, forgettable, just another pair of hands carrying plates. Tonight she walked through the main entrance, her head held high, her heart pounding against her ribs like a war drum. The hostess looked up, confused. "Ma'am, do you have a reservation?" "I'm expected," Ruth said. "Private dining room, Günther Schmidt." The hostess's eyes widened with recognition. The waitress. The one everyone had been talking about. The one who had disappeared. "Right this way." Ruth followed her through the familiar dining room, past tables where she had served thousands of meals, past customers who had never once looked at her face. Tonight they looked. Tonight they saw a woman walking toward something that might destroy her. The door to the private dining room opened. Günther Schmidt sat at the head of the table, exactly where he had sat 5 nights ago, when Ruth's world had changed forever. He was alone, a glass of wine in his hand, his cold blue eyes tracking her every movement. "Mrs. Harrison," he gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit." Ruth sat. Her hands were trembling, but she forced them to stay flat on the table where Schmidt could see them. "You came alone," Schmidt observed. "Smart. I was worried you might try something foolish. You threatened my granddaughter. I would do anything to protect her." Schmidt smiled, that reptilian smile. "Yes, family. Such a powerful motivator." He took a sip of wine. "You know, I've been thinking about you, Ruth. A waitress who taught herself German in secret, who listened for 18 years without anyone knowing, who had the courage to try to stop me." He tilted his head. "In another life, you might have been useful to me. I would never work for someone like you." "Someone like me?" Schmidt laughed softly. "You don't know anything about me, Ruth. You see a villain, a monster. But I'm simply a businessman who understands how the world really works. The strong take from the weak, the smart take from the foolish. That's not evil. That's nature. You destroyed Walter Harrison. You drove him to suicide." Something flickered in Schmidt's eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or maybe just boredom. Walter Harrison destroyed himself. He was weak. When he discovered what had happened, he couldn't handle the truth. "That's not my fault. You stole everything from him. His company, his dignity, his will to live. I took what he was too stupid to protect." Schmidt leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Just like I'm going to take everything from Ernie Crawford. Just like I'm going to take everything from you." Ruth felt the fear coiling in her stomach, but she didn't look away. She had spent 19 years looking away. Not tonight. "What do you want, Mr. Schmidt?" "I want you to convince the Crawfords to sign the contract. Tomorrow. The original contract with all the clauses intact." Schmidt smiled. "And then I want you to disappear. Leave the city. Never speak of this again. Do that, and your granddaughter lives a long and happy life." "And if I refuse?" Schmidt's smile vanished. "Then Emma learns what happens to people who cross me. And so do you." Ruth was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Before I give you my answer," she said quietly, "I want you to hear something." She pressed play. A man's voice filled the room, broken and desperate, speaking through tears. "Linda, honey, I'm so sorry. I trusted them. I trusted Schmidt, and they took everything. Everything I built, everything I wanted to leave for you. It's gone. They tricked me, sweetheart. The contract wasn't what they said. There were clauses hidden in the German version that I never saw. By the time I realized what happened, it was too late. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I love you. Please forgive me." The recording ended. Schmidt's face had gone pale. "That was Walter Harrison," Ruth said, "the night before he died. His daughter Linda has kept that recording for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to use it." "That proves nothing," Schmidt said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "By itself, maybe not. But combined with the financial records Linda gathered, the testimony from former Steinberg employees, the emails describing how contracts were deliberately mistranslated," Ruth leaned forward, "and combined with the photos that Carlos took of you meeting with your surveillance team at the hotel." Schmidt's eyes widened. "Oh yes," Ruth continued, "my manager, the one you dismissed as nobody. He followed your people. He photographed you giving them instructions. He's ready to testify." "This is a bluff," Schmidt said, but sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. "Is it?" Ruth smiled for the first time. "Then let me tell you something else. I didn't come here alone tonight, Mr. Schmidt." She raised her voice slightly. "You can come in now." The door opened. Matthew Crawford entered first, followed by Ernie. Behind them came Thomas Chen, holding a folder of documents. Then Carlos, his phone raised, recording everything. Then Linda Harrison Cole, her eyes blazing with 3 years of grief and fury. And behind them all, 2 men in dark suits with badges clipped to their belts. Gunther Schmidt, one of the agents said, stepping forward. FBI, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice and suspicion of involvement in the death of Agent Michael Torres. Schmidt shot to his feet, knocking over his wineglass. This is entrapment. This is illegal. Actually, the other agent said calmly, it's justice. Agent Torres was my partner. Before he died, he sent me everything he had on you, including evidence that you ordered his death. Schmidt's face crumpled. For the first time, Ruth saw the man behind the monster. A man who had spent 30 years believing he was untouchable. A man who had finally run out of room to run. You can't do this, he whispered. Do you know who I am? Do you know who my friends are? Senator Walsh? Ruth asked quietly. We know about him too. His name is all over Linda's documents. By tomorrow morning, his office will be raided. His career will be over. She paused. You're not untouchable anymore, Mr. Schmidt. You're just a criminal who finally got caught. The agents moved forward with handcuffs. Schmidt didn't resist. He seemed to have aged 20 years in the space of a minute, his shoulders slumped, his cold eyes now empty. As they led him past Ruth, he stopped. How? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. How did a waitress destroy everything I built? Ruth looked at him steadily. Because invisible people see everything, Mr. Schmidt. And eventually, we stop being silent. They took him away. The silence that followed was profound. Ruth stood in the private dining room where her life had changed, surrounded by the people who had helped her fight back. Matthew and Ernie, Carlos and Thomas, Linda and the FBI agents. A family forged in crisis, united by courage. Linda approached her first. Tears were streaming down her face. He's gone, she whispered. After 3 years, after everything, he's finally going to pay. Your father would be proud, Ruth said, taking her hands. My father would have loved you. Linda laughed through her tears. A waitress who brought down an empire. He always said the real heroes were the people nobody noticed. Ernie was next. He wrapped Ruth in a bear hug that lifted her off her feet. You saved my life, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You saved my company. You saved my son from a woman who would have destroyed him. He pulled back, looking at her with wonder. How can I ever repay you? You already have, Ruth said. You believed me. When nobody else would have, you believed me. Carlos stepped forward, looking uncomfortable but determined. Mrs. Harrison, I owe you an apology. 19 years you worked for me and I never really saw you. I never asked about your life, your dreams, your struggles. He shook his head. You deserved better. You saw me when it mattered, Ruth said gently. That's all that counts. Matthew was last. He stood before her, this young man who had gone from stranger to ally to something like family in the space of a week. What happens now? He asked. Ruth thought about the question. A week ago, she had known exactly what her life looked like. Work, home, silence, invisibility, a small existence that asked nothing of the world and expected nothing in return. Now everything was different. I don't know, she admitted. But for the first time in a very long time, I'm excited to find out. Her phone buzzed, a text from David. Mom, we saw the news. Schmidt arrested. Is it true? Are you okay? Ruth smiled and typed back, It's true, it's over. Emma is safe. I'm coming home. 3 dots appeared. Then, I'm so proud of you, Mom. Emma wants to talk to you. She says her grandma is a superhero. Ruth laughed, tears streaming down her face. A superhero. Her. The invisible waitress who had spent 19 years being nobody. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe heroes weren't the people in capes and costumes. Maybe heroes were the ordinary people who found the courage to do extraordinary things. The people who refused to stay silent when silence was easier. The people who risked everything to protect strangers who had shown them kindness. Maybe being invisible wasn't a weakness. Maybe it was a superpower waiting to be used. 1 month later, Ruth stood at a podium in a federal courthouse. The case against Gunther Schmidt had exploded into national news. Senator Walsh had resigned in disgrace. Steinberg Industries was under investigation. 3 more victims had come forward with stories similar to Walter Harrison's, and Ruth Harrison, the waitress who had started it all, had been asked to speak. She looked out at the crowd. Reporters with cameras, lawyers in expensive suits, families of victims crying and holding each other, and in the front row, her people, David and Emma, Ernie and Matthew, Carlos and Linda, the family she had never expected to find. "My name is Ruth Harrison," she began, her voice steady. "For 19 years I was invisible. I served meals to powerful people who never looked at my face. I heard secrets that could have destroyed lives, and I stayed silent. I told myself that silence was survival, that invisibility was safety." She paused, gathering her strength. "I was wrong. Silence isn't survival. Silence is surrender. And invisibility isn't safety. It's a prison we build around ourselves brick by brick until we forget that we ever had a voice." She looked at Emma, who was watching her with wide, adoring eyes. "I found my voice because a good man showed me kindness, because his son believed a stranger, because a manager I barely knew risked everything to help me, because a daughter who lost her father refused to give up." Ruth smiled through her tears. "I found my voice because I finally understood that being invisible doesn't mean being powerless. It means seeing what others miss. It means knowing truths that others ignore. It means having the chance when the moment comes to change everything." She straightened her shoulders. "To anyone out there who feels invisible, your voice matters. Your courage matters. You matter. And one day, when you least expect it, you might be the only one who can make things right." Ruth stepped back from the podium. The applause that followed was deafening, but Ruth barely heard it. She was looking at Emma, who had broken free from David and was running toward the podium with arms outstretched. "Grandma! Grandma!" Ruth knelt down and caught her granddaughter in a hug that contained 19 years of silence, 5 days of terror, and a lifetime of love. "I love you, baby girl," she whispered. "I love you too, Grandma." Emma pulled back, her little face serious. "You're not invisible anymore, are you?" Ruth laughed, tears streaming down her face. "No, sweetheart, not anymore." She stood up, holding Emma's hand, and walked toward her family, toward David, who was crying openly, toward Ernie and Matthew, who were applauding with everyone else, toward Carlos and Linda, who had become friends she never expected, toward a future she couldn't have imagined a month ago. Ruth Harrison had spent 19 years being invisible. Now finally she was seen, and she would never be silent again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters. And tell me in the comments, have you ever found the courage to speak up when staying silent would have been easier?